Matthew 14:22 through 33. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, and the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and beginning to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The word of the Lord.
Well, welcome to our sermon series on Lent, and of course we're going to talk about mornings, and we're going to talk about again making mornings matter with this idea that really how we start our day is probably one of the most important things we do, and will inform so much more of the rest of our day. In much the way how we spend our Lent, whether we spend it actually doing the things that God wants us to do, taking the time to pray and reflect and think about life, will really inform our celebration of Easter. That's why we do these preparation seasons like Advent and Lent. So what we're going to use is we're going to use the book of Matthew throughout Lent and through Easter. And the stories we're going to look at in Matthew, they may look a little disjointed to you as we go through the weeks, but there is actually a through line, and the through line are things that happen in the mornings. So this is one of the first stories we have in Matthew's Gospel, something that was specifically said to have happened in the morning. And it is this moment where Jesus walks on the water. Now, you kind of have to know where we are in the story, on the overarching story of Jesus. We're still relatively new. We're still kind of early into Jesus' ministry. And if you notice at the beginning of this passage, it says, Jesus dismissed them and then sent the disciples away. The them that Jesus dismissed were the 5,000 that were fed at the feeding of the 5,000. So that's what just got over. So Jesus fed all these people. They were there all day. Jesus taught them all day. We get that great lesson where the disciples are like, "How are we going to feed them? We don't have enough fish." And Jesus is like, "Hold my drink. Let me just show you." So Jesus, so we have that moment, and then Jesus needs like a little me time, right? And Jesus will do this from time to time. Like he's like, "I'm gonna go up on this mountain and pray. You guys get in the boat and cross the sea." And of course, most of the disciples at this point are fishermen. Like they're very used to boats. Actually, this isn't a weird thing for them to do. So okay, so they get in the boat and leave. And Jesus spends the night praying. And then we get this moment that we have today where Jesus is walking on the water towards them. Now, this is not something obviously that people do. It's not something you see people do today. It really isn't something you see people do 2,000 years ago. There was this storm, so that the idea, I'm sure what the disciples were thinking was, oh my gosh, Jesus tried to swim out to the boat and he drowned, and now this is his ghost, and oh my gosh. You can kind of see where they would get to, and if it's been a stormy night, they're not operating on a lot of sleep either, right? Let's just be fair. This is a very, very odd and frankly awkward situation. Now, we learn a couple of things about Jesus that are important here. One is Jesus kind of exhibiting some mastery over the water should remind us of something, and the thing that it probably should remind us of is Moses, right? And so we have, while Moses parted the Red Sea, God through Moses parted the Red Sea, and they could walk across on dry land. So now we have Jesus kind of upping the ante a little bit on Moses, saying, not only am I like Moses, just you wait. there was also something else at the time. At the time Matthew is writing, there is an emperor of Rome, as there usually is. And the emperor of Rome, one of the things at the time he was known as the ruler of the land, of the seas, and nations. And one of the things that early followers of Jesus like to do is they used to like to co-opt the language of the day and how people talked about Caesar and those sorts of leaders, and co-opt that as a way of talking about Jesus. So here we have Jesus acting as the Lord of the Sea in a way that no one's ever seen before. So we got this great moment, right? Everybody's probably a little sleep deprived. Everybody's tired, right? The morning has come, but probably people are not feeling particularly well rested. This is a very awkward situation, and you can just pretty much guarantee anytime there is an awkward situation in the Bible, in the Gospels especially, Peter is going to do something, because Peter just loves himself an awkward situation. And I love Peter for that, right, man? He is totally, a leap before you look, speak before you think kind of guy. And we've seen lots of examples of that. And this is one of them, right? So Peter is probably a little sleep deprived, probably a little tired, sees Jesus walking across the water and goes, man, I want to do that too. And you could almost, even as the words are coming out of his mouth, you could almost imagine him like halfway off the boat, right? Like he's like, I'm going to do this. And it's this great moment that Peter has, and Jesus is like, sure, come on down. Like, sure, come on down. You can do it. You can do it. I'm telling you, you can do it. You can do it. So, of course, Peter does. And then Peter probably starts to wake up a little bit more, right? And realize, wait a minute, this is not something that people do, right? Like, this is what's going on here. And then, of course, when that happens, it says Peter starts to sink. I think one of the things we need to make sure we really kind of wrap our heads around and really spend time considering is what's really going on with Peter right now. Well, yes, Peter is losing faith, right? I mean, that's the problem. He's losing his belief that what he is doing is possible. But it's important to recognize, what is he losing faith in, right? Because I don't think he's necessarily losing faith in Jesus. Jesus isn't the one sinking, right? Jesus is fine. Jesus is fine, right? Right? What Peter is losing faith in is really Peter's losing faith in himself. And he's losing faith in the idea that Jesus, not that he is so amazing that he can walk on water, but he's losing faith that God can work through him in that way. That's what he's losing faith. And he's basically saying, wait a minute, he doesn't really question that Jesus can do it, because obviously Jesus is Jesus. He's questioning that he is able to do it. That God is able to work that way through him. And I think oftentimes that is the situation we can often find, most of ourselves can find ourselves in. I find myself in all the time, is the sense of, yes, I recognize something may sound difficult, and I recognize, of course, God, through God's amazing grace and power and glory, can do whatever. I'm just not sure about me being able to do my part of it. So Peter loses faith. Jesus says, you of little faith. The thing that Peter didn't have a lot of faith in wasn't really so much Jesus. The thing that Peter didn't really have a lot of faith in was himself. Now, one thing I like about the story too is this is where we get kind of one of Jesus's like superhero moments, right? Like where he does those things that, we would currently associate with like superheroes. And superheroes are kind of having a moment right now, right? I mean, just in society and all that kind of stuff. I mean, superheroes are kind of where it's at. I think most of the, we got the normal ones you think of, and then my daughter is constantly watching these sorts of shows where we got the superheroes, and we got the daughters of the superheroes and the sons of the superheroes, and right? I mean, it's all that kind of stuff. And if you look at like the top 10 grossing movies of all time, like I think 8 of them are like superhero Marvel movies now. And don't get me wrong, I gave Marvel plenty of my money and continue to, right? Like, part of the reason that those movies are so popular is that I bought a ticket or 5, to see them. And to some point, and somehow I do enjoy them, and I enjoy the escapism of the superhero genre, but there is something that's always kind of bugged me about it. And what always sort of bugged me about it is almost to a one, when you deal with superheroes, oftentimes they are honestly just sometimes too perfect. And I don't mean like their powers are too perfect, but they're like just too well adjusted as people. right? I mean, even the ones that are supposed to be messed up, like, that's supposed to have some tragic past, like Batman or whatever, really, he's still a pretty together guy, right? And I have to think, if you grew up that way, or you discovered you have powers, or you grew up rich the way some of them do or whatever, I just don't think you would be that together. Like, I think you would be far more awkward. And that's really one thing I've realized is missing in the superhero genre, is really like the awkward superhero that I feel like would probably be closer to me. Now, some of you, if you can put your brains in reverse a couple of decades, know that that's not actually entirely true. That there is something that sort of meets that definition. And before I tell you what it is, we're going to play a little bit. Kimberly's going to be a good sport with me, and we're going to play a little bit of Name That Tune. So I'm going to see if you remember this song and the TV show that went with it. So take it away, Kimberly.
Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so free. Flying away on a wing and a prayer. Who could it be? Believe it or not, it's just me.
Thank you, Kimberly. You're so awesome. Yes, the greatest American hero. If you remember that show, it was on in the early 80s. That was part of the theme song. And the thing I love about that song is it just kind of encapsulates the whole thing. It's like, believe it or not, it's just me. Right? And so this TV show, it lasts for about 3 seasons. If you don't know what it is, I think it's streaming on Amazon Prime. But basically the idea behind the show is this kind of everyday guy. He's actually a substitute teacher, is bequested a magic suit by aliens, because of course that's where magic things come from. But he loses the instruction manual, right? So he has no idea what the powers of the suit are. He just knows it has some powers. And of course, the suit has some powers, and one of the things that it can do is fly. And so that means he has those powers too, and he can fly. But he's not particularly good at it. And to show you, I've got like a 15-second clip of some highlights of some greatest American hero flying action. So let's go ahead and can we play that? No, we can't? No. Okay, so no, we can't. All right, well, you can Google it, Greatest American Hero Flying. Google that on YouTube. But the problem is that he has is the suit helps him fly, but it's kind of up to him to land, right? And he's not very good at it. So basically, every show there will be one or two, really interesting landings that he did, because that part's sort of up to him. And throughout the show, the whole thing is basically, here's this guy, normal, everyday, just me kind of guy, not particularly coordinated, not particularly special, who's given access to all these extraordinary powers, and he has to decide what to do with them. And the thing I like about the show, one, is it feels much more honest. Because again, I feel like the awkwardness that he has is the awkwardness we would all have. Like, I wouldn't mind a suit that helped me fly, but I'm sure I would not be very good at the landings either. Like, that would be a problem for me. But the interesting thing is that he chooses to actually do it, right? He doesn't give the suit back. He doesn't bury it in the backyard. He doesn't, he doesn't, just hang it up in the closet, right, and forget about it. But he actually, despite all the awkwardness and despite how ill-prepared he feels, and despite all of that, he is still willing to step out, and frankly step out in faith, and try. And I think that, in the end of the day, is a far more interesting lesson, and I think a far more important lesson for us than what we typically get from the normal superhero movie. Because the normal superhero movie is, if you have special powers, you are special, right? But I like the lesson here, where yes, he's given a special gift. He's given the chance to do something, not because he earned it, not because he was overly wonderful, not because he was particularly smarter, better, stronger, faster than anybody else. He's just him, just random guy. But instead of saying, I can't do that, I don't believe I can do that, instead of saying, I can't be that, he's willing to step out in faith and do it. Now, of course, if he didn't step out in faith and do it, there wouldn't be much of a TV show watching a suit hang in a closet. So, I understand it's a TV show. But I think in the same way, that's similar, in similar ways, it's kind of what Peter does, right? So Peter steps out of the boat. He's willing to do it, right? And he will keep stepping out and sometimes, stepping in it. But Peter will keep doing those things because, and keep struggling against that, and this understanding that not that Peter is all that special, and there's plenty of times in the Bible where Peter's more than shows us he's not particularly special. But because he is learning and coming to understand who Jesus is and the specialness that Jesus has. Now, I think if we're honest, we've all kind of run into this in life. Several times. I've certainly run into it in my life. One of the things that's always been true about me is I've always looked younger than I am, right? Which my grandfather had that same thing, and he said, "You're going to really love that when you get into your 60s." But when I was like in my early 20s and looked like I could looked like I probably shouldn't be allowed to vote, it could be a challenge sometimes. And so early in my career, I would walk into these rooms, and especially when I was doing projects for big companies and stuff, I would walk in there, and it was hard to be sometimes not only the youngest person in the room, but clearly looking like the youngest person in the room. And every once in a while, people would come up and they're like, "Really, you're here to work on this? Like you're who they sent?" And I learned rather quickly that I could say whatever I wanted to say, and I could try to defend myself however I wanted to defend myself. But the most important thing to do, and the thing I really needed to do, was frankly just let my work speak for myself, right? So I realized okay, I'm just going to have to do the work and do the work really, really well. Because I can say whatever I want, I can try to defend myself however I want, but at the end of the day, what really matters is doing the work and doing it well. So that kind of became my mantra. Now, the nice thing is, about looking young is as the years go on, you do get older, right? Like you do get out of that phase. And that was certainly true. So when I got into my late 20s and stuff, it wasn't such a big deal in that industry because, frankly, if you're a 30 to 30 or 35-year-old software developer, so like that, they're over the hill, man. I mean, that's just I don't think that's crazy. My problem was I didn't stay in that profession, as you all know. And one of the things I laughed about when I did change professions and go into the church again, go into the world of churches, suddenly I became young again. Like I wasn't young anymore when I was a software engineer, but then I became a pastor. Suddenly I was really young once again. And my first church that I served full time, lovely people with an average age far over the average age of our church. Very, very nice, but there was a lot of, "You're the youngest pastor we've ever had." I was reminded of that many, many, many times until I finally dug into the actual history of the church and realized I was not the youngest pastor they ever had. There was a guy who was about 6 months younger than me back in 1918, and he was actually the founding pastor of the church, who then died during the Spanish flu. So we're not going to repeat that history. That's not good. But I would start to remind them of that. I'm like, well, actually, the guy who started this place was younger than I am. That really didn't help a lot, by the way. But there we have those situations, right? And so I think this is like my first summer there. This picture you're looking at on the screen. We're doing a blessing of the animal. Speaking of awkward moments, this dog really didn't want to be touched on their head, so I think I'm blessing the backside there. I'm not sure who the guy in the obnoxious yellow shirt and smash mouth hair is, but I suppose that was me. But I realized fairly quickly if this was going to work, we were just going to have to get to know each other. We're going to have to love each other. And again, the work that I did would have to speak for it. And that's because that's really at a certain point all you can do. So we all, I think, we all have these awkward situations, right, that we run into where we start to question, am I the right person for this? Are they right? Is it weird that I'm so young? All those sorts of things. Or should I be doing this? Is this something that people like me do, right? And I think anytime we step out of that norm and we enter those kind of more awkward places, we can start to struggle with those ideas. Like, is it just me? Is this something that was possible? Now, I heard a story about this. I want to finish with this. I've heard a story about this recently at a podcast I was listening to, and it's about a young guy named Robert Vaughn. Robert Vaughn kind of grew up in southern Ohio, near Kentucky, in kind of a industrial town. Grew up very poor. So he wanted to go to college, but didn't have the money to go to college. And so in his community, that mean either getting kind of a working class job in the factory, some minimum wage work around there, or the kind of the path out for a lot of people was to go join the military. So that's what he did. He joined the Navy, and he's like, where do you want to go? And he's like, as far away from Ohio as possible. And I don't mean to be picking on Ohio again. Apparently, I like to do that. But I did live there, so I can feel like I have permission. But he's like, I want far away as possible. So they sent him to San Diego. where he was. That's where his ship was based out of. And he spent 4 years aboard and really talked about it. And he talked about, well, in the interview, he talked about that. He talked about being a Boy Scout growing up. He talked about doing kind of really quintessential guy things and being and really loving, being in that environment with other men and kind of doing what we would understand as kind of typically men things. Eventually, though, he does get out because he qualifies for the GI Bill so he can go to school. When he's signing up to go to school, his soon-to-be father-in-law, who's in the medical profession, came to him and said, Rob, you should really think about being a nurse. Pays good, very in-demand jobs, you can work all sorts of places. And in his mind, he's like, no, men aren't nurses. That's a woman's job. And instead, he actually gets a job as a security guard in a hospital. And one night, he tells this great stories, one night he's there, and they've got two people who come into the emergency room very under the influence of something, and they start to cause problems there. And he is, as the security guard, is forced to kind of go in there and help restrain these people. And through this process, he got to watch sort of firsthand how the nurses responded to these out-of-control people in the ER. And he was in awe, frankly, of how they responded and how they worked with him. And basically that, and he saw that, what he thought of one way, that nursing was actually a very, very physical job, right? So they were in there physically restraining these folks every bit as much as they could. They were cool heads under fire, and everything that he appreciated, basically about his shipmates back on the ship, he saw in these nurses there, and it kind of changed his idea and his mind about what it was to be a nurse. And so he does. He went to nursing school. He got to, and he went to go work at a hospital as a nurse. And even still today, he talks about it's not uncommon for him to walk into a room with a patient and introduce himself as the nurse that will be taking care of him. And he says it's not uncommon. About a weekly basis, he has a patient that isn't so sure that they want that. And I have to imagine that's got to be an awkward thing, right? Like here, you've trained for this job, you're credentialed, you're experienced, all that. But by all reports, he's very good at what he does. But there's this somebody who's like, I'm not sure I want you to be my nurse because I've never had a male nurse. And his response generally is, okay, I can talk to, if that's really a problem, I can talk to the charge nurse and we can try to rearrange schedules. And he says most of the time, people will go, no, it's fine. You can stay. And many times, he shared stories many times that at the end of the stay, people stay in the hospital, they will seek him out and say, you are one of the best nurses I've ever had. Not saying anything bad about the rest of the nurses, but his work, what he does, speaks for himself. The challenge that he had to overcome his own awkwardness around this idea of what it is that men do and what it is that women do, he had to overcome. He also, on a regular basis, has to overcome the awkwardness other people feel about him in his role. Many of us, I think, can relate to that. Many of us have faced those times when we're like, I think maybe I can do this. I think maybe I want to do this. But is this something that I can do? Is this something that people like me do? Is this possible? This feels weird. Obviously, that is the situation that Peter was in when he steps out of the boat, right? He sees something, like, I want to do that. I see Jesus doing that, and I want to do that too. That looks really neat. And then he starts to feel really awkward about it. He's like, wait a minute. People like me don't do this. And what was important is he was fine. He was fine. He was fine when he had confidence in Christ. He was fine when he had confidence that Jesus could do it. He only starts to sink when he loses some faith in himself. He only starts to think when he gives in to the awkwardness. So I think one of the things that we have to do in our lives is recognize that there will be awkward times. There will be places where we are going to feel like a fish out of water. We're going to feel like we're being asked to do something, or we are doing something that people like us don't do. As you know, right now we're doing these morning devotions. So hopefully you all know that we're doing these daily morning devotions every day during Lent, except for Sundays. If you look for one today, it wasn't there. Every day for Sundays. And I got back, as I sent an email out to about 50 different people in our church saying, would you consider writing a devotion for this? Here's what it would look like. Here's some instructions. I got back some version of the same email about 6 times, and some version of the same email that went, my first instinct when you asked me to do this was no. My first instinct was to say, I don't do these sorts of things. Like a half dozen of you said that. But I thought about it some more, and I thought I would give it a try. So let me see what I can do. And I will tell you, as someone who's gotten to read all of the ones we've gotten back so far, is there's not a one that isn't interesting. There isn't a one that isn't thought-provoking. There isn't a one that isn't inspirational. There isn't a one that isn't going to be a gift to all of us, including the ones from those 6 people who at first wanted to say no because they felt awkward about it. So when we think about what it is to make our mornings matter, one of the things that no doubt we need to think through in the mornings is what our day is going to be like, what challenges we may face, what opportunities there may be there. And if there's something in your day that you're not sure about, if there's something in your day that is causing you to have those little butterflies, or something in your day that you're feeling awkward or ill-prepared or like wondering whether or not this is something that somebody like you should be doing, we should remember. We should remember Peter on the boat and Peter stepping out in faith. We should remember that at the end of the day, the thing we have confidence in, yes, we should have confidence in ourselves, but the thing at the end of the day we have the most confidence in is God. And the thing we have the most confidence is God working through us. So let's have faith in God. Let's have faith in God's ability to do great things. Let's have faith in the fact that we've all been given gifts. And they may not have been a magic suit that came on a spaceship, but we've all been given gifts. Let us have faith that God doesn't make mistakes when God hands them out. And let us have faith that even when we may feel a little weird or a little awkward about it, that we are all God's beloved children, called to do the work of sharing the good news in whatever way that we can. So yes, we will feel awkward sometimes. Yes, we will be asked to step out of the boat sometimes. Let us have faith in the God that asks us to. Amen.